Check it out.
Okay, that's fine. Sweet. Very good. Then you're asking.
Okay, we're starting now. Hello, we are the Google Developer Student Club, and we would like to welcome you to our UX design workshop, where you will learn how to create better experiences for people. Okay, our lead will soon say a small word about how to behave responsibly. First off, my name is Riwa. I'm a third-year computer engineering student who believes in the integration of engineering and design. I will be presenting the UX design event today, and I would like for it to be fun and collaborative, so feel free to ask any questions and raise your concerns. So starting off, to go into any topic, you have to define it. So what is user experience? The user experience is how a person, the user, feels about interacting with or experiencing a product. But okay, now we know it's about people experiencing products, but maybe you're wondering, what is a product? A product is a good, service, or feature. It doesn't have to be tech-related. It can be the door of this room or the chair you're sitting on. UX designers need to think about every person who uses the product. This might include people with disabilities or people with very different life experiences from your own. We will discuss further later on how you include everyone in your product, so keep this in mind. Okay, let's start off with a case study. You want to shop for shoes. You feel confident going in. You Google, you find a website, and you feel hopeful. And you navigate to the shoes category. You feel excited. You find 300 results. You don't see a filter for the shoes. How do you feel?
Can you repeat the question?
So you're going into a website for shoes, and you find a lot of results. You find 300 results. You're very excited, but you don't find a filter for the shoes. How do you feel?
Disappointed.
Exactly. You feel shocked. You feel disappointed. So you keep scrolling. You don't give up, but you find nothing. So how do you feel?
I'm more disappointed.
Exactly. You start feeling frustrated. But exactly. So you finally find shoes, you add them to the cart, and you're feeling relieved. You're going to the checkout page, and you're going to get new shoes soon. But then you get a pop-up telling you to sign up, and it's a really long form, so you probably give up and you leave the website. This is a bad user experience. The website just lost a customer and many more potential ones. So to dive into UX design, we have to think of what makes a product good to use. For example, for a user to have a good experience, the product needs to be usable, equitable, enjoyable, and useful. So let's talk about each one. For it to be usable, this means that the design, structure, and purpose of the product are clear to everyone. For example, do you remember those old ketchup bottles that used to be in glass? And when you try to put like a bit of ketchup, it spills out? They replaced those with a plastic, squeezable, ketchup bottles, which made them a really good user experience. Now, to move on to equitable design. Being equitable means your designs are useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities and backgrounds. For example, if you're designing an application and it doesn't have sound or text-to-speech, this will not work on people who have visual impairment. So you will lose a lot of customers. Now, moving on to enjoyable. User experience is also about making things enjoyable to use, which creates a positive connection between the user and the product. For example, if you're going on Tutors and you find a restaurant that doesn't have pictures for the food it serves, how hesitant would you feel before buying something off of it?
A lot.
Okay, so like food review apps such as Google or Yelp, they offer enjoyability and allow the user to make a more informed choice. And finally, obviously, the design has to be useful, because as humans, we want products that are useful, meaning they solve our problems, such as Google Maps or any map app that gets you home. Now, how do we match our product to the characteristics we talked about before? Simply research. To know how users feel, we have to collect evidence on how they're experiencing that product in real time and ask them about it too. Because regardless of industry, it is said that business that focused on good usability and design performed better than their competitors. So a designer has to be empathetic. Empathy is the ability to understand someone else's feelings or thoughts in a situation, and it's a major part of user experience. So we're going to stop with a little activity, and I want you to look at this Foodieland app, and I want you to try to identify good user experience. So try to identify at least one aspect of this app that demonstrates usable, equitable, enjoyable, and useful design.
Pictures.
Okay, exactly. The pictures are nice. They're
Option. Option.
Exactly.
Amount and choice.
So let's start with one by one. Enjoyable, the pictures, they're visually appealing. Usable, the options. For example, you have add to cart, checkout. They clearly indicate what will happen next when interacted with. So that's good. Can you find an equitable?
There's an audio option.
Exactly. And a translation feature. So it's helpful for people who speak different languages. And finally, a useful one. Something we mentioned before with the shoes. Exactly. So it has a filter which helps the user easily select a pizza to order. Okay, so we won't go in depth with these. I just wanted you guys to see how diverse UX design is and how very needed it is in several domains. So for example, we have interaction designers, visual designers who focus on colors, typography, etc. Motion designers, UX program managers, they communicate and they fix everything that's going on in the project. VR designers, UX researchers, UX writers, and finally UX engineers who basically connect the designer and the developer. Now, you want to design your product. You already made sure it has all the qualifications for it to be a good user experience. But where do we start? So your responsibilities as a UX designer would be researching, first of all. Like we said, we have to understand our audience and learn about their backgrounds, their demographics, where they live, how old are they, what are they motivated by, their pain points, emotions, and their life goals. And then we have to wireframe. So we'll talk about this more in detail later on, but wireframing is basically a small outline or a sketch of a product or a screen. So how everything fits together. And then we have to prototype. So after we wireframe, we have to actually create like an early model of the prototype so we can show our clients what it's going to be like in the future. And then we have to organize everything, which is the information architecture. So for example, if you're working on a website, you'd work on its framework, how it's organized, like where can, for example, in a PowerPoint, you can see the file, the new, the print about. Those are all information architecture. And finally, of course, in any job, you have to communicate effectively, have meetings with your colleagues, write emails, etc. So this also applies for different jobs, but we have different types of UX designers. We have the specialist, the generalist, and the T-shaped. Does any of you know what each one alludes to?
I think the eye is like he's so good, but like only one thing.
Exactly.
Like tool, and then العرض horizontal, so he knows a lot, but like average we can learn, and then T is the best of both.
Exactly. So the T-shaped designer, which is something you have to be in every domain or every work you're in, basically. The T-shaped designer, he specializes in one kind of UX design, but he has a breadth of knowledge in other areas. So the vertical line represents your specialty, while the horizontal line represents your complementary skills. Okay, so you might be thinking, why do I need design? Well, as we previously mentioned, design is everywhere. It can lead you to several jobs, and you don't have to be a professional UX designer for it. But it's an asset you need whenever you are creating or innovating. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're creating, whether it was for your boss, for your clients, for an audience, you have to make sure they get the best user experience out of it. So here are some jobs that will definitely use UX design. So web developers and software engineers, obviously they're responsible for building the digital products that UX designers come up with. They take the prototypes that created by UI and UX designers and code them into actual websites and apps. And then we have product managers who are mostly strategic. They determine which user needs and business objectives the product should fulfill. And third of all, we have data analysts. So data analysts are responsible for gathering and analyzing data in order to help the business grow. And you know who else works with data? UX designers. So user research and usability testing are two major components of the UX designer's role. And finally, or nearly finally, UI designers. So UX and UI designers work closely together as part of the same team. So UI design is perhaps one of the most obvious upskilling opportunities for UX designers. There's a distinct difference between UX and UI designers, and we will talk about this more in the next slide. And fifth is project managers. So like we said, UX designers are good at communicating effectively and handling projects. So if you are working as a UX designer, you can continue to become a project manager. Okay, any questions till now? Okay, so there's nothing in the chat, so I will go on. So UX design and UI design. Now, I'm going to slowly ease in for what a lot of people mistake UX design to be, and that is UI design. Can someone generalize what the difference is?
Is it the same?
Yeah, what's the difference? Just generally, whatever you think.
The user interface is the actual buttons, the clicks that you can do. The user experience is how you feel about this button.
Exactly. Okay, so the UI, which is short for user interface, the design, it refers to the aesthetics behind the product. So for example, if it were a website, like you said, a UI designer would focus on the color schemes, the typography, like navigation elements, button styles. So if you're a developer, Bootstrap will not always save you. And UX, on the other hand, focus on the more general idea on how a user goes through the product and what guides them. So UX is more structural, whereas UI is more visual. And this is just a quote to explain the difference between UX and UI. So imagine you're designing a house. UX would be the foundation, while UI would be the paint and furniture. So just decorating the house. Now, I'm sure not all of you will become front-end developers. And I'm sure that some of you, even when you become front-end developers, you will not need to design your own page if you're working at a big company. However, if you were working on a personal project or working for a small company, then you're most likely not going to have a UX designer at hand, or in the rare occasion, have one as a friend. So you're stuck doing your own design, unless you want to steal a template, which I never advise. So where do we start? For web development, we start with low-fidelity wireframes. These can be quick and easy to adjust, and all they require is a pen and paper. Most of the time, you're not going to find the perfect design from the start. You're going to need to discard your design and start from scratch. This is why low-fidelity wireframes can be great to avoid investing time, resources, and money for a product design you will not end up using. Now, after you are done with your very basic concept of a website and you feel satisfied with the placements, you will move on to more advanced wireframing. When you need to gather feedback and user validation, find and fix problems in your interface, and simulate system responses, low-fidelity wireframes just won't cut it. This is where high-fidelity wireframes are more appropriate. So high-fidelity wireframes give you impressive interactivity, like we can see here. In the app, you can move around, and you can test specific UI components and interactions with several screens. They also give you realistic aesthetics, as they look almost exactly like the final product. And the important apps that get you into high-fidelity wireframes are like Figma or Adobe XD. So any questions? Okay. So tips, tricks, and common mistakes. And what makes a good UX designer? So have you ever tried to leave a room, pulled the door handle, but the door didn't budge?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of embarrassing. That's because you were supposed to push the door handle, not pull it. As designers, we have to think about how to improve the user experience with the door so that we can easily exit and enter. Doors with this kind of poor user experience are called Norman doors. So what does this mean in app design? So how do you think we can apply user experience in app design?
We can apply it through that, how the page moves, how page type, whatever they enter, and how they transcend from one element to the other.
Exactly. So for example, instead of putting text on a page, if you find an icon that's clear for it, you just replace the text with an icon. That way you can save space and make the app more visually appealing. So before we move on, can I get some examples of things you use every day, like whether they're good UX or bad UX design, like anything you see every day, like the ketchup bottles we talked about, maybe the chair you're sitting on?
Chair with the right-hand side only to right.
Yeah. Ooh, as well, the LEU chairs, they always have a slipping table, so that's very bad UX design. Do you ever use a website on the daily that's actually bad, but you have to use it? Tutus is actually a bit good.
Blackboard.
Exactly, Blackboard. Blackboard can be very confusing. And what's worse than that is the LEU portal, because I think most of us still don't find the add by force form, and that's very bad UX design. Okay, so moving on. Now we're going to move on to where UX design is most popular, in web design. I'm going to be giving you a list of things you should pay attention to. To start off, we can agree all together that we must avoid these elements from a website. So first off, background music. You do not want to go in a website and listen to background music unless it is very minimalistic. And we don't want to use overused Flash. That is very outdated. So for example, in the left website, that's a very old website, and I think they were just trying to experiment with HTML, so they didn't really care about the design. And we don't want to be using very bright colors. So as you can see in the right one, the colors are simple. It's just a simple palette, not to confuse the user. We also do not want to be using GIFs or animations because they're definitely gonna take all the user's attention instead of allowing them to focus on the site's content. This is unless, of course, you can use the animations to send the info you need. Okay, so moving on to typography and images. So there's a quote that says, "Bad typography kills great content." So some mistakes you can make are using too big or too small font sizes, or never-ending paragraphs, or fonts like Comic Sans MS. Make sure you are using the right fonts to send the right messages. So in the left website, you can see that there's no white space. There's no space at all for the user to read. So here's what you should do. So number one, focus on having white space between text. This allows the user to read without stressing out their eyes, but pay attention, too much white space gives off emptiness. So remember, big, bold fonts are read first. So in the right website, you can see the title is in a big font and it's bold. So you'd probably read it first once you enter the website. And divide your content properly and leave the very long text for a learn more section. No one wants all the information directly. So how can we understand how a user reads? How a user reads in a website? Like, what's a good way to learn how a user reads in a website?
Test it ourselves.
Exactly. A good advice would be going on random websites and seeing how you would read them. So ask yourself this: where does your eye land first? Do you want your user to see that first as well? And also make sure that the information is spread correctly. You do not want the user's eyes to be jumping everywhere. You want to lead them on with the information. And as for images, they can create a long-lasting impression. So do not use low resolution photos or photos that take too much space and do not fit the website preferences. And if the image is not related to the text, do not bother putting it.
Papyrus. Good font or not?
No, Papyrus is not a good font. You can look up which fonts are the most famous for UX design at the moment.
Avatar used it.
Avatar is a 20-year-old movie. Okay, so so finally, in good versus bad web design, we have to think about consistency. So inconsistency is what makes a bad website. I want you to go through this short checklist to avoid this design mistake. You have to make sure all the colors match each other. So all the colors belong to one palette, and you're not adding colors left and you have to make sure all the elements deliver a consistent message. And you have to make sure that you can form an opinion about the company by looking at the main page only. So if you look at the right website, you can already like form a small opinion about the guy who made it. So users will form an opinion about your page in less than a second. So try and get the best impression at that time. And remember the principles of UX design that we talked about in the first place. Okay, so some references that will greatly help you in skipping a big portion of UI UX research, thanks to AI, are the following. So has anyone heard of any of these references?
Thanks to you, I've heard of coolers.
Okay. So coolers will generate a lot of palettes for you using any colors you want, or using random colors as well. We'll try it on if we have time. And FontJoy, it's actually a very impressive deep learning model that pairs fonts for you. So have you ever started designing something or writing something and you didn't know which fonts to put together and which fonts work together? So this model does the job for you. And finally, Flux, an SVG creator that saves you a lot of time and adds small yet full of life art to your page. And the question for you, more focused on development, can anyone tell me why it's better to use SVGs instead of images?
لما تعمل scale نفس like massive pixelated.
Exactly. So SVG files contain enough information to display vectors at any scale, and they take less file space as well. And finally, can you guess what's the best tool to go for in 2023? ChatGPT. It can give you color combinations, ideas for page layouts, fonts, etc. But remember, it's still a human experience, and ChatGPT is only an AI model. So trust your instincts and the principles of UX design. Okay, so does anyone have any questions? Okay, does anyone want to see the references we made, or do I leave that to you to research the references?
Show us.
Show us. Yeah. Okay, let me just.
You mentioned Flux, is it correct?
Yeah.
How do you FLUX?
FLUX. Okay, let me just. Okay, so the first one is coolers. And it's honestly very impressive. I use it all the time. And for example, it needs a Pro if you want more than, I think, 6 colors.
You have to change and click it.
مبينة هون بس. مبينة هون.
مبينة على presentation meeting.
No.
What do you do quicker?
Okay. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can, yeah, you can add actually a lot of colors. And if you press space, okay, no, you can't actually add more than 5 colors. So, okay, if you press space, it will generate different color palettes for you. And if you like a certain color, for example, this one, you can just lock it and press space again, and it will give you all the color palettes that work with that one. And you can always like lead it down to just one color that you're changing, which is actually really good. But you probably don't want that many colors on your website because 5 is a bit too much. So maybe like 3. Okay, let's see Font Joy. Okay, so Font Joy, for example, we have these colors together. And if you keep generating, it starts pairing fonts for you. And then you can lock one and generate different ones, and they all work with each other. Now, you can just, the best way to go with fonts is to Google which are the best fonts for UX design in 2023, because mostly everyone is trying to go for a minimalistic approach, because that's what's good right now. And finally, Flux. Is it? Okay. Okay, so you can change its colors, you can randomize it, and you can say like how it blends, what the colors are. And there are definitely other SVG creators where you can add them to your website. But yeah, it's pretty cool if you have a lot of empty space in your website that you don't know what you want to fill with. And that's everything for, unless you have any questions.
Flux بعمل images يعني ولا؟
Flux بيعمل ال SVG files اللي هن are like images but they're vectors. So instead of an image, you have a vector that you can scale up and down.
The content, it's an image itself.
Yes, let me show you. It gives you the code for ال SVG as you've ever used it.
لا, I haven't.
Okay, so if you press copy SVG, you can either save it or copy it. But as you copy the SVG, and take a very long code to put it in your code, basically. You can change the width, height, however you want. Okay, so that's about it for everything. Any questions?
يمكن هاهم الشات.
Sure.
ما في حدا. Okay, so thank you for joining, and we'll wait for any questions in the chat. You are free to leave if you have no more questions.